You were not born to carry his shadows. Yet you did, quietly, without asking, without being asked. The moment you saw pain flicker behind his eyes. The moment you felt his emotional distance like a cold wall between you. Something inside you made a silent vow. I'll be good enough. I'll be strong enough. Maybe then he'll stay present. Maybe then I'll matter. But what Carl Jung understood, and what most of us spend decades learning, is that being born to a wounded father isn't accidental. It's archetypal. It's a spiritual assignment written into the very fabric of your soul's journey. Your father's emotional absence wasn't a verdict on your worth. It was the foundation for your awakening. The space where his love should have lived became the birthplace of your deepest compassion. The silence where his guidance should have echoed became the chamber where your inner wisdom learned to speak. You came here not to heal him, but to heal what he couldn't heal in himself. You came to break a pattern that has lived in your bloodline for generations, perhaps centuries. And the wound you've been carrying? It's not your burden to bear forever. It's your doorway to becoming whole. This is the beginning of that journey home to yourself. You learned to read the room before you could read books. You became fluent in a language of eggshells, tiptoeing around his moods, his silences, his explosive moments that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. When you were 5, maybe 6, you stopped asking him to play. Not because he said no, but because you saw something die in his eyes when you asked, like your joy was too much, too bright, too demanding for whatever darkness he was wrestling with inside. So you learned to be small. You learned to need less. You learned that love was something you earned through perfection, not something you received simply for existing. Jung called this the father complex, not just the presence or absence of a father, but the internal template that gets carved into your psyche about what masculine love looks like, what strength means, what it takes to be worthy of care. Here's what no one tells you about growing up with an emotionally wounded father. You don't just miss his love, you start to question if love itself is real. Take David, 32, sitting in his therapist's office last month, finally putting words to something he'd felt his entire life. I keep waiting for people to leave. Not because they say they will, but because that's what love feels like to me. Temporary, conditional, like I'm always one mistake away from being too much. David's father wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He was just absent, present in body, vanished in spirit, working late, scrolling his phone during dinner, offering advice that felt more like instructions than connection. I remember being 8, David continued, trying to show him a drawing I'd made. He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds, said, "That's nice," and went back to his newspaper. I still have that drawing. I kept it for 24 years, thinking maybe someday I'd show it to him again and he'd really see it. You made an unconscious agreement that shaped everything that came after. I will become whatever version of myself makes him proud, even if it means I disappear in the process. You confused his emotional unavailability with your failure to be lovable enough. You turned his wound into evidence of your unworthiness. And somewhere along the way, you started living your life like a constant audition for a part you'd never actually get. This is where the shadow work begins, in that space between what you needed and what you received, between who you were and who you thought you had to become to be chosen. Pause for a moment. What part of yourself did you silence, hoping it would make you more lovable? Maybe you stopped crying when you were hurt, because his discomfort with emotions taught you that feelings were weakness. Maybe you became hyper-independent, because asking for help felt like proof that you were too much. Maybe you learned to anticipate everyone's needs except your own, because service felt like the only currency that bought you attention. Jung understood that these adaptive strategies, these masks we wear to survive unmet love, eventually become prisons. He called it the persona, the face we show the world when we've forgotten our true face. And then, as an adult, you find yourself attracted to people who feel familiar. Not safe, familiar. Partners who are emotionally distant. Friends who take more than they give. Bosses who withhold approval the same way your father withheld presence. You think you're choosing love, but you're actually choosing the wound. You're trying to win a game you lost 30 years ago. Jessica, 29, described it perfectly. I keep dating men who make me feel like I'm chasing something just out of reach. They're charming, successful, but there's always this wall I can't break through. And I exhaust myself trying to prove I'm worth being let in. My therapist asked me last week what my father was like, and I realized, oh God, I've been dating my father. Not literally, but emotionally. The same distance, the same mixed signals, the same feeling that love is something I have to earn instead of something I deserve. This is the spiritual purpose of being born to a wounded father. You came here to learn that love isn't earned. It's recognized. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung discovered that every wound contains its own medicine. Every absence points toward what wants to be born. The father you needed but didn't receive isn't gone forever. He lives inside you, waiting to be awakened. Not as a memory or a fantasy, but as a living presence, the wise, protective, encouraging masculine energy that can guide you home to yourself. This isn't about becoming your father. This isn't about forgiving him or fixing your relationship with him. This is about understanding that the very qualities you crave from him, presence, acceptance, unconditional love, quiet strength, these are not his to give or withhold. They are yours to cultivate. The man you needed him to be is the man you are meant to become. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize the truth that changes everything. You were never broken. You were just trying to love someone who didn't know how to receive it. This moment of recognition is what Jung called enantiodromia, the turning point where one's psychological state transforms into its opposite, where victim becomes creator, where wound becomes wisdom, where the child who is shaped by his limitations becomes the adult who transcends them. His silence wasn't about your worth. His emotional distance wasn't evidence that you were too much or not enough. His inability to see you, really see you, wasn't because you were invisible. It was because he had learned to make himself invisible long before you were born. Your father's wound didn't begin with him. He inherited it from his father, who inherited it from his father before him. Generations of men who learned that emotions were dangerous, that vulnerability was weakness, that the safest way to love was from a distance where you couldn't be hurt. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he wrote about the collective unconscious, the inherited patterns that move through family lines like underground rivers, shaping each generation until someone is brave enough to bring them into the light. You are that someone. Think about your grandfather for a moment. What do you know about his relationship with his father? What was the emotional climate of his childhood? If you've heard stories, they probably involve men who were even more emotionally shut down, even more distant, even more unavailable than your father. Maybe your great-grandfather lived through the Great Depression, learning that survival meant emotional shutdown, that feelings were a luxury he couldn't afford. Maybe he fought in a war, coming home with trauma he had no language for, no support to process, no permission to feel. These men weren't villains. They were casualties of a culture that taught them that masculinity meant emotional invulnerability, that providing was more important than presence, that strength meant never needing help. Your father inherited this template. He learned from his father that love was expressed through providing, not presence. That strength meant emotional control, not emotional availability. That being a good man meant never being a burden, never needing comfort, never showing the soft underbelly of his humanity. He was doing the best he could with the emotional tools he inherited. But his best wasn't enough for what you needed. And that's not your fault, and it's not his fault. It's just the reality of inherited trauma. Understanding this doesn't excuse the impact his limitations had on you, but it does free you from taking his emotional unavailability personally. It helps you see that his wound was never about you. It was the continuation of a generational pattern that predated your existence. This is where the shadow work becomes sacred rebellion. You refuse to pass his wound to the next generation. You refuse to perpetuate the cycle of emotional unavailability that has lived in your bloodline for decades, maybe centuries. But here's what makes this so difficult. Healing requires you to grieve not just what you didn't receive, but what he didn't receive. It requires you to feel compassion for the little boy inside him who learned that love was dangerous, that expressing needs was weakness, that the only way to be safe was to need nothing from anyone. Take a breath. Let yourself feel the weight of carrying a wound that was never yours to heal. This is the paradox of father wound healing. To truly free yourself from the pattern, you have to understand it so deeply that you can feel compassion for the person who wounded you. Not because he deserves it, not because you have to forgive him, but because compassion is what breaks the cycle. When you can see him as a wounded child who grew up to become a wounded adult, rather than just as the father who failed you, something shifts. The anger doesn't disappear, but it's joined by something else, a recognition of the shared humanity in suffering. Marcus, 34, described this shift beautifully during our conversation last month. I spent years angry at him for not being present, and that anger was valid. I needed to feel it to honor how much his absence hurt. But then I started seeing pictures of his childhood, hearing stories about his father, my grandfather, and I realized he was just doing what he learned. His dad was even more distant, even more shut down. It doesn't excuse it, Marcus continued, his voice carrying both grief and understanding. But it helps me understand that I can be the one who ends it. I can be the father my kids need, and the father the little boy inside me still needs. I can break the chain. This is the spiritual assignment. To break the chain not through hatred of the past, but through conscious love in the present. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes practical magic. You stop waiting for external validation and start providing it for yourself. You stop looking for the perfect father figure and start becoming him. The inner father isn't just a metaphor. It's a living psychological function that can be developed and strengthened. It's the part of your psyche that can provide guidance when you're lost, protection when you're afraid, encouragement when you doubt yourself, celebration when you succeed. Developing your inner father means learning to speak to yourself the way you needed to be spoken to, learning to encourage yourself the way you needed to be encouraged, learning to comfort yourself when you're afraid, to celebrate yourself when you succeed, to hold yourself with patience when you fail. This isn't self-help. This is soul work. This is becoming whole. But it requires you to first acknowledge how you currently speak to yourself. Most people with father wounds have internalized a harsh inner critic, a voice that sounds suspiciously like the emotional unavailability they experienced as children. How do you speak to yourself when you make a mistake? With patience and understanding, or with criticism and judgment? How do you respond to your own needs? With compassion and care, or with dismissal and minimization? How do you celebrate your accomplishments? With genuine pride and joy, or with immediate focus on what's next, what's not enough, what needs to be improved? The inner father provides what Jung called holding, the psychological container that allows growth to happen safely. When you can provide this holding for yourself, you stop needing others to be perfect parents to you. You stop seeking in romantic relationships what you didn't receive in childhood. Jung understood that psychological gold is created through the alchemical process of transforming lead, turning our deepest wounds into our greatest wisdom. The very thing that broke you becomes the thing that makes you whole. Your father's silence taught you to listen deeply to others who were struggling to be heard. His emotional absence taught you to feel everything, to develop exquisite emotional sensitivity and empathy. His inability to see you taught you to really see others, to notice when someone is hurting or hiding or hoping to be recognized. The wound becomes the gift. The absence becomes the presence. The pain becomes the portal. But this transformation isn't passive. It's not automatic. It requires conscious choice. It requires you to daily choose healing over repetition, growth over safety, love over fear. It requires you to do what Jung called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with the inner father, asking for his guidance, feeling his presence, allowing him to comfort and encourage the wounded child within you. Right now, in this moment, you get to choose. Will you continue living his unlived life, or will you finally start living your own? Jung discovered that healing happens through what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create a third option that transcends the original polarity. Instead of being stuck between "I need my father's love" and "my father can't give me what I need," the transcendent function creates "I can give myself what I needed from him." This isn't resignation or giving up on receiving love from others. This is recognizing that the deepest healing comes from becoming internally what you sought externally. When you can provide yourself with presence, acceptance, encouragement, and protection, you stop being desperate for others to provide these things. You can receive them when they're offered authentically, but you're not dependent on them for your sense of worth. This is emotional sovereignty, the ability to meet your own deepest needs while remaining open to genuine connection with others. The healing doesn't happen in therapy alone. It doesn't happen in one conversation or one realization. It happens in 1,000 small moments when you choose to parent yourself differently than you were parented. It happens when you comfort yourself after a difficult day instead of numbing the feeling with alcohol, work, or endless scrolling. It happens when you celebrate your wins instead of immediately focusing on what's next, what's not enough, what needs to be improved. It happens when you set boundaries that protect your energy instead of depleting yourself to make others comfortable. This is the spiritual work, becoming the father your inner child still needs. Inner child work isn't about regression or wallowing in past pain. It's about providing in the present what was missing in the past. It's about healing the developmental wounds that shaped your nervous system, your attachment patterns, your core beliefs about worthiness and love. Rachel, 28, shared this breakthrough during our recent conversation. "I realized I'd been waiting my whole life for someone to tell me I was enough exactly as I am. Not when I achieve more, not when I fix my flaws, not when I become some perfect version of myself, but right now, in this moment, exactly as I am." So I started telling myself. Every morning, I look in the mirror and I say, "I see you. I'm proud of you. You are enough." It felt ridiculous at first, like I was lying to myself. But now it feels like coming home. Rachel's practice illustrates something profound. The inner child doesn't need grand gestures or perfect parenting. They need consistent, gentle presence. They need to be seen and accepted and celebrated for who they are, not what they do. Reparenting isn't just an abstract concept. It's a set of practices that gradually reshape your internal landscape. When you're upset, instead of immediately trying to fix or solve, first offer yourself comfort. Put your hand on your heart. Speak to yourself with the tenderness you would show a hurt child. "This is really hard. I see how much this hurts." You're not alone. When something good happens, big or small, pause to actually celebrate. Don't immediately move to the next goal. Feel the joy. Tell yourself you're proud. Let the success land in your body. When you're facing a decision, ask yourself, what would a wise, loving father tell me right now? Listen for the guidance that comes from your highest self, not your fear or your conditioning. When someone crosses your boundaries or treats you poorly, respond from your inner father, not your inner child. Set clear limits. Don't try to earn respect through pleasing or performing. Part of this healing involves distinguishing between toxic masculinity and sacred masculinity. Your father may have confused strength with emotional shutdown, power with control, love with providing material things rather than emotional presence. Sacred masculinity knows that true strength includes gentleness. That real power includes vulnerability. That authentic love includes presence, not just provision. You get to redefine what it means to be strong. You get to model a different way of being masculine. One that includes the full spectrum of human emotion. One that values connection over conquest. One that sees asking for help as courage, not weakness. This is especially important if you're a man healing father wounds. You're breaking not just your personal pattern, but the cultural pattern that has been damaging men and their relationships for generations. But this healing is equally important for women with father wounds. The inner masculine energy isn't about gender. It's about the archetypal qualities of structure, protection, encouragement, and guidance that every person needs access to within themselves. Here's something important. Healing doesn't require you to reconcile with your father. It doesn't require you to pretend the hurt didn't happen or to force a relationship that feels unsafe or inauthentic. Forgiveness, in the deepest sense, is not about them. It's about you. It's about releasing the grip that old wounds have on your present life. It's about choosing freedom over being right. Sometimes forgiveness looks like having a conversation where you express your truth and hopefully receive acknowledgement. Sometimes it looks like writing a letter you never send, pouring out all your feelings, and then burning it in a ritual of release. Sometimes forgiveness looks like simply releasing the fantasy of who you needed him to be and accepting who he actually is, a flawed human being who did the best he could with the tools he had, even if his best wasn't enough for what you needed. The goal isn't to change him. The goal is to free yourself from the prison of waiting for him to change. This distinction is crucial. You may spend years hoping that if you just find the right words, the right approach, the right moment, he'll finally see you, finally apologize, finally become the father you needed. But your healing can't depend on his willingness to grow or change. It has to depend on your willingness to provide for yourself what he couldn't provide. There's a moment in every hero's journey when the spell is broken, when you realize you were never powerless. You were just under the influence of an old story about what you were worth. Your father's emotional unavailability cast a spell that said, love is scarce. Attention must be earned. You are too much or not enough, but definitely not just right as you are. Breaking this spell requires you to write a new story. Love is my birthright. I am worthy of presence and care. I am exactly as I need to be, growing exactly as I need to grow. This new story doesn't deny the reality of your wound. It doesn't pretend that his absence didn't hurt or that the impact wasn't real. But it refuses to let that wound define your worth or limit your capacity to receive love. The spell is broken through repetition of new truths, through daily practices that contradict the old programming, through choosing again and again to see yourself through the eyes of love rather than through the lens of his limitations. When you heal this wound, you don't just heal it for yourself. You heal it for everyone who comes after you. Your children, your partner, your friends, your community. They all benefit from your courage to break generational patterns. You become a safe harbor for others who are carrying father wounds. Your healing becomes their permission to heal. Your wholeness becomes a beacon that says, this is possible. Freedom is real, but the ripple effect goes beyond your immediate circle. Every person who heals a father wound contributes to the collective healing of the wounded masculine. Every person who learns to love themselves without conditions helps create a world where love isn't something we have to earn. What would change in your life if you stopped performing for love and started receiving it? What would change in the world if every person with a father wound did this healing work? As you continue this journey, you'll notice that you start responding to life from a different place. Instead of reacting from the wounded child who's still trying to prove their worth, you respond from the healed adult who knows their value. You stop taking other people's emotional unavailability personally. You recognize it as their wound, not evidence of your unworthiness. You start setting boundaries without guilt. You realize that protecting your energy is an act of self-love, not selfishness. You begin to attract different kinds of relationships. People who can meet you in emotional presence. People who appreciate your depth instead of being threatened by it. You discover a different relationship with your own emotions. Instead of seeing feelings as weakness or inconvenience, you recognize them as guidance, as wisdom, as the very thing that makes you fully human. You are not damaged goods because of your father's wound. You are not less capable of love because of what you didn't receive. You are not destined to repeat his patterns simply because they shaped your early years. You are the conscious one, the aware one, the one who sees the pattern and chooses something different. In Jung's terms, you have moved from unconscious repetition to conscious choice, from victim to creator, from wound to wisdom, the sacred masculine that was damaged in your bloodline, the part that protects without controlling, that provides without withholding care, that leads with heart as much as mind. This energy is being restored through you. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but consciously, intentionally, with love. You are healing not just for yourself, but for all the fathers who came before you who didn't know how to heal. You are becoming the man they carried in potential but never actualized. That little boy or girl who wanted so desperately to be seen, to be chosen, to be celebrated. They're still inside you, and they're no longer waiting for someone else to see them. They're looking to you now. They're trusting you to provide the presence, the encouragement, the unconditional love that was missing then. You are both the child who needed love and the parent who can provide it. You are both the wound and the medicine. You are both the question and the answer. Your healing is not a destination you arrive at one day, fully complete and permanently whole. It's a daily practice of choosing love over fear, presence over performance, authenticity over approval. Some days you'll forget. Some days the old patterns will feel stronger than your new awareness. Some days you'll slip back into trying to earn what you already deserve. This is normal. This is human. This is part of the journey. The invitation is not to be perfect. The invitation is to be conscious, to notice when you're acting from the wound and gently guide yourself back to wholeness. You came here with a sacred assignment, to transform inherited pain into conscious love, to alchemize generational wounds into wisdom, to become the father your lineage has been waiting for. This doesn't mean biological fatherhood necessarily. This means embodying the archetypal father energy, the part that protects the vulnerable, nurtures growth, provides guidance, celebrates achievements, offers comfort in failure. You are the root your family tree never had, the foundation your future is built on, the healing your bloodline has been waiting for. Whether or not your father ever says it, whether or not he ever sees you the way you needed to be seen, whether or not he ever becomes the man you needed him to be, here is the truth that sets you free. You are always enough. You are always worthy. You are always lovable exactly as you were. His inability to see it wasn't evidence that it wasn't true. It was evidence that he was looking through the lens of his own wound. But you get to see clearly now. You get to love fiercely now. You get to live freely now. This is not the end of your father's story influencing your life. This is the beginning of your story, transforming his legacy. You are not the continuation of his silence. You are the voice that breaks it. You are not the keeper of his wound. You are the healer who transforms it. You are not his unfinished business. You are your own magnificent beginning. And that beautiful soul is the spiritual purpose of being born to a wounded father, not to heal him, but to heal what he couldn't heal in himself. Not to become him, but to become whole. The little one inside you who has been waiting so long to be chosen. They can rest now, because you chose them, because you saw them, because you love them home. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome home to wholeness. Welcome home to the love you never had to earn. If this resonated with your soul, know that your healing journey matters. Your courage to face these wounds doesn't just heal you, it heals the collective. Take a moment to breathe, to feel, to honor how far you've come. And if you're called to continue this conversation, I'm here.